Aderimi was a great hunter, a hunter who made a very big mistake, a mistake which almost cost him his life. All because of hunger. The Forest of Igbẹ was a living, breathing entity. Its name meant, Forest of Life, and the villagers knew this truth in their bones. The air hummed with it, a low, green thrum felt more than heard, a vibration that entered through the soles of the feet and settled in the chest. Giant Iroko trees, bearded with moss, stood as silent sentinels, their roots like petrified serpents breaching the earth. Sunlight, when it pierced the dense canopy, fell in shattered gold coins upon a floor of damp, decaying leaves and luminous fungi. Here, every rustle was a conversation, every bird call a warning or a blessing, and every law was sacred. The first and greatest law was one of balance: take only what you need, give thanks for what you take, and never, never hunt near the clearing of Itojoran, the Glade of Heavenly Rest. It was a place where the veil between the world of men and the world of spirits was as thin as a spider's silk. To shed blood there was to tear that veil, with consequences too terrible for the old stories to fully articulate. They were taught simply: the glade is not for the hunter's foot, nor the farmer's knife. It is the mirror of the other world. Aderimi knew the laws. He had learned them at his grandfather's knee, his voice a dry rustle like the turning of ancient pages. The forest provides, Aderimi, the old man would say, his blind eyes seeming to gaze into the very heart of the woods. But it is a covenant. We are its stewards, not its masters. Break the covenant, and the life you take may very well take you in return. But knowledge and hunger are two different languages, and in the 7th year of the great drought, Aderimi was fluent only in the latter. The rains had been shy, then absent. The river On, usually a robust, chattering artery of life, had shrunk to a resentful trickle between cracked mud banks. The yam fields yielded only fibrous, stunted tubers. The cassava was bitter with desperation. In the village, the children's bellies were distended, their eyes too large in their thin faces. The elders' prayers to Oloron and the orishas of the forest rose with the dawn smoke, fervent and fraying with worry. Aderimi, often young and living in a hut at the village edge that seemed to shrink with each passing season, felt the hunger as a personal failure. He was a skilled hunter, perhaps the most skilled of his generation. His hands, long-fingered and sure, could craft arrows that flew with the intent of a thought. His eyes could read the subtle script of the forest, a bent blade of elephant grass, a disturbed termite mound, the meaning behind a monkey's alarm call. Yet for 3 days, his snares had been empty, his arrows had found only air. The game had grown wise and scarce, retreating deeper into the green heart where even Aderimi hesitated to follow. On the morning of the 4th day, as a bleached and merciless sun climbed, his mother's old bronze bracelet, the last thing of value he owned, tucked in a leather pouch, was exchanged for a small bag of millet from a skeptical trader from a distant, less afflicted village. The millet was gone by evening, a thin porridge that did little to quiet the gnawing void within him. Despair, a cold and heavy stone, settled in his gut. He looked at his bow, the opal crafted by his grandfather, and felt not pride, but a sharp accusation. What use was skill without success? That night, a whisper came to him, not from a person, but from the depth of his own need. It slithered through the cracks of his tradition and his fear. The glade, the animals know it is forbidden. They would feel safe there. One shot. One quick, clean kill. Give thanks afterwards. The village needs meat, not stories. It was blasphemy. It was temptation dressed in the rags of necessity. He wrestled with it until the moon, a patched sliver of silver, hung high. He saw the face of little Folik, his neighbor's daughter, whose laugh had been replaced by a weak, coughing cry. He thought of the king, Oba Alarinka, in his palace, who surely had full storehouses. But the king's wealth did not filter down to the huts at the edge. The responsibility, as always, fell on the shoulders of those who knew the land. As the first hint of grey touched the east, Aderimi rose. He took his bow, a handful of his best arrows fletched with eagle feather, and a small skin of water. He did not perform the usual pre-hunt ritual of offering kola nuts to Enyon, the Orisha of the forest. His heart, choked with shame and determination, could not form the words. He slipped from his hut and into the pre-dawn gloom, a shadow among shadows. The journey to the inner forest was a progression into another world. The familiar, friendly trees gave way to older, stranger ones. The air grew cooler, sweeter with the scent of unseen flowers. Silence pulled here, a deep, watchful silence that swallowed the sound of his own footsteps. He felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, but when he glanced around, he saw only dappled shadows and curling vines. And then he found the sign, a single, perfect hoof print in a patch of soft earth near a trickling stream. It was fresh. It was large. It led inward, toward the place he had sworn to avoid. His hunter's heart leaped, a traitorous, eager beat. Just follow. See where it goes. You don't have to enter the glade itself. He moved now with preternatural stealth, every sense stretched taut. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The bird songs had ceased. The only sound was the frantic drum of his own blood in his ears. He smelled it odoran before he saw it, a fragrance of night-blooming jasmine, damp earth, and something else, something electric and ancient, like the air after a lightning strike. The trees parted. The glade was a perfect circle, a bowl of emerald moss cupping a pool of crystal-clear water fed by a spring that bubbled silently from a rock shaped like a kneeling woman. Flowers bloomed here in impossible colors, indigo, silver, a red so deep it was almost black. The light was diffused, golden, seeming to emanate from the very air and the dewdrops on the moss. It was a place of profound peace, a peace that immediately shattered Adarimi's resolve. For there, on the far side of the pool, head bowed to drink, stood an antelope. But no antelope of this earth. It was a creature of legend. Its coat was the color of moonlight on water, a shimmering, pearlescent gray that seemed to shift with every subtle movement, throwing off sparks of silver and pale blue. Its horns were not mere spikes, but elegant, spiraling layers of polished ebony, inlaid with what looked like tiny, glowing constellations. Its eyes, when it lifted its head, were vast and dark, holding the quiet depth of the forest pool. It was beauty incarnate, a living piece of the glade's magic. Adarimi's breath caught. Every instinct, every fragment of his upbringing, screamed at him to retreat, to prostrate himself, to beg forgiveness for this intrusion. This was no ordinary beast. This was an Erinal, a forest spirit, a guardian. But then his eyes, trained to assess, noted the defined line of its ribs against the shimmering hide. The slight tremor in its flank. It was as hungry as he was. And in that moment of perceived vulnerability, the hunter overrode the man. The needs of his village, the disgrace of his empty hands, the roaring void in his own stomach, they coalesced into a single, blinding point of focus. One shot. A spirit animal. Its meat will feed the village for a week. Its magic might break the drought. It is a sign, a sacrifice offered. He knocked an arrow. The word narrowed to the curve of the bow, the rise and fall of the magnificent creature's breath. He chose his spot, just behind the shoulder, where the heart would be. A clean kill. A merciful kill. He would give all the thanks afterwards. He exhaled, and let the arrow fly. The sound it made was wrong. It was not the soft thump of impact on a quarry, but a sound like a shattering crystal, a discordant chime that reverberated through the glade. The shimmering antelope made no cry. It jerked, a graceful, almost dancerly stumble. Then it collapsed onto the soft moss. A wave of icy air swept through the glade. The golden light dimmed. The vibrant flowers seemed to wilt. Adarimi's triumphant rush froze in his veins, replaced by a dread so profound it turned his limbs to water. He had expected spirit magic, but not this silence. He forced himself to approach, his bow held limply at his side. He had to retrieve his arrow, to begin the butchering, too. The body began to change. The shimmering fur melted away like mist under a morning sun. The elegant horns dissolved into motes of black light. The form shimmered, contracted, elongated. Bones wrinkled with sickening, audible cracks. The antelope's shape blurred, resolved, and settled into a new one. Lying on the moss, an arrow protruding from her chest, was a young woman. She was dressed in a simple but finely woven arrow and buba of ashok cloth, now stained with a spreading, crimson bloom. Her hair was braided in intricate, regal patterns adorned with tiny coral beads. On her wrists and ankles were delicate silver bands. Her face, turned to the side, was one of unearthly beauty and familiar nobility. It was a face seen on festival days, smiling from the royal days. A face minted on the rare coins of the kingdom. Princess Adizwa. The beloved only child of Oba Alarinka. The heart of Igbilu. Adarimi's mind shattered. He stumbled back, a raw, animal sound tearing from his throat. The bow fell from his nerveless fingers. This was impossible. A nightmare spawned from hunger and guilt. He blinked, but the horrifying image remained. The princess's chest gave one final, shallow rise and fell still. The pool of blood on the luminous moss was an obscenity. The whispers of the old stories rushed back in a torrential, accusing flood. The glade is a mirror. The king's line carries the old magic. A gift from the forest spirits. A secret known only to the rulers and the eldest priest. He had not killed an antelope. He had committed regicide. He had murdered the king's daughter, the village's princess, a being touched by the gods themselves. Panic, pure and mindless, seized him. There was no thought of help, no concept of explanation. There was only the overwhelming, primal need to flee from the monstrous reality he had created. He turned and ran, crashing heedlessly through the undergrowth, the image of the princess's still face burned onto the back of his eyelids, a scar on his soul. He ran from the glade, from the forest, from the truth, leaving behind his bow, his arrows, and his humanity in the sacred moss of Itojoram. The discovery was made by the princess's handmaiden, who had grown worried when Adizwa did not return from her morning meditation. The girl's scream brought the royal guards, then the priest, and finally, a storm-faced Oba Alarinka. The king was a mountain of a man, his authority woven into the very fabric of his being. Love for his daughter was the soft, hidden core of that mountain. Seeing her laid out on a litter, the crude hunter's arrow still in her breast, that core turned to volcanic glass. His grief was a silent, terrifying thing. He did not weep. He did not rage. He simply knelt, touched her cold cheek, and when he stood, his eyes were like chips of obsidian. "Find him," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a falling tree. "Find the one who did this." Adarimi was not hard to find. He hadn't returned to his hut. They found him catatonic, sitting by the shrunken river rocking back and forth, covered in mud and scratches, muttering, the antelope," over and over. He offered no resistance as the guard seized him. The evidence was incontrovertible, his unique arrows, his abandoned bow at the scene. His guilt was painted in the mad terror on his face. The trial was not a matter of law, but of cataclysmic wrath. The village, plunged into a collective mourning that echoed the forest's sudden silence, bayed for blood. "Kill him! Burn the murderer! Feed his heart to the dogs!" The elders, led by the high priest Babalawo Olajide, a man whose face was a map of deep wrinkles and deeper knowledge, struggled to maintain order. Oba Alarinka sat on his throne in the packed village square. Adarimi, bound, was thrown at its foot. The king looked down at the shivering hunter, this nobody who had erased his son. "You entered the forbidden glade," the king stated, the words hanging in the hot, still air. Adarimi could only nod, a jerky, broken movement. "You drew your bow in a place of pure spirit." Another nod. You fired upon and killed my daughter, Princess Adizwa. Aderimi found his voice, a hoarse croak. I saw an antelope, great king. A shimmering doe. I did not know. I swear by all the orishas, I did not know. A murmur, partly of disbelief, partly of superstitious fear, ran through the crowd. The story of the royal family's secret pact with the forest spirits was known only in vague, whispered legends. For most, it was a fairy tale. The king's face darkened further. The admission was a second blasphemy, exposing a sacred mystery. Ignorance, the king boomed, is no shield for sacrilege. You broke the oldest law. Your action has not only taken a life, it has broken a covenant that has protected Igbilu for 30 generations. You have spat in the eye of the forest, and now we will all taste its wrath. He stood, his wrath filling the square. The punishment is death. A slow, public death, so the land may witness justice and be satisfied. The crowd roared its approval. But as the guards moved to drag Aderimi away, Babalawo Olajide stepped forward. He was old, but his voice cut through the noise like a knife through silk. Oba Alarinka. Elders. People of Igbilu. Hear me. Silence fell, grudgingly. The Babalawo commanded respect that even grief could not fully erase. The king's rage is just. The hunter's crime is abominable. But the law of the forest, the very law he broke, speaks not only of transgression, but of balance. Itan must be answered with Idejo, a skin must be met with a counterweight. Simple death, it is a release. It is an end. The forest anger, the princess's unquiet spirit, will they be appeased by a mere cessation? He looked at Aderimi, his gaze piercing. He killed a princess who was, in spirit and magic, of the forest. He saw her as a beast. He acted as a hunter. The Babalawo turned to the king. Great Oba, I invoke the oldest law, the law of Idagbasok, the mirrored consequence. Let the punishment fit the crime in the eyes of the spirits. Let the hunter who saw a princess as an animal, become the animal he believed her to be. Let him live with the mind of a man in the body of a beast. Let him wander the forest he violated, a permanent testament to his era, a living sacrifice to restore the balance his arrow shattered. A stunned silence gripped the square. The concept was terrifying, a fate worse than any torture. Oba Alarinke considered it. In the Babalawo's words, he saw not mercy, but a profound, cruel justice. Aderimi would not escape to the peace of the ancestors. He would be trapped, forever reminded of what he had done. He would suffer as the forest suffered, as the king suffered. A grim, horrible satisfaction settled on the king's face. So be it. Let the law of balance be enacted. The ritual was performed at dusk at the edge of the forest, where the world of men met the world of spirits. Aderimi, stripped of his clothes, was painted with intricate patterns in ash and indigo. Babalawo Olajai chanted incantations so old the language was forgotten, calling upon Enyun, upon age, the Orisha of wild things, and upon the spirits of Itojoran. The air grew thick and charged. The villagers watched from a distance, fear and a warring in their hearts. Aderimi, past terror now, in a state of numb acceptance, felt the change begin. It was not pain, but a profound, unsettling rearrangement. His bones softened and wrinkled. His skin prickled as a coat of short, dumb brown fur sprouted across his body. His hands curled, fingers fusing, nails hardening into small, blunt hooves. His spine elongated, his posture shifting forward. His face stretched, his senses sharpening explosively. The scent of the terrified crowd became overpowering. The rustle of a leaf 100 yards away was clear as a shout. The world looked different, wider, viewed from a lower vantage point, colors shifting into different spectrums. But inside, his mind remained trapped, screaming in a silent prison of sinew and bone. He tried to speak, to beg, but only a soft, panicked bleat emerged from his new throat. The final touch was the curse's mark, across his new flank, where the arrow had struck the princess. A patch of fur grew in pure, shimmering silver, a permanent, luminous scar. Oba Alarinka looked upon the antelope that was Adarimi. "Wander," the king commanded, his voice thick with grief and vindictiveness. "Wander the forest forever, hunter. See if you can outrun your guilt in those legs. Let the beast you once hunted now be your kin. This is the balance." With a cry that was half human sob, half animal distress, the antelope that was Adarimi turned and bolted into the deepening shadows of the forest of life. Behind him, the village began the long, loud mourning for Princess Adizwa, her body prepared for a royal burial she would never truly have, for her spirit, tangled in the violent magic of her transformation and death, could find no rest. The first year was a descent into a hell of consciousness. Adarimi's mind, fully human, was crammed into the simple, instinct-driven physiology of an antelope. The conflict was constant, agonizing. Hunger was a sharp, overwhelming urge to graze on grasses whose taste was now complex and satisfying. The smell of a leopard sent instinctual terror screaming through his nerves, demanding flight, while his human mind tried to reason, to remember paths, to hide. Thirst was a deep pull toward water his new senses told him was safe or unsafe. He slept in fits, his ears twitching at every sound, his dreams a chaotic montage of his past life and primal fears. The forest, which had been his workplace, his ladder, became an infinite, sentient prison. He knew its paths, its secret springs, its dangers. But now he experienced them as prey, not predator. He learned to move with a new silence, to freeze at the slightest hint of danger, to understand the language of the forest from the bottom of the food chain. The shimmering silver scar on his flank made him an outcast even among his own kind. Other antelope would startle at his strange scent and the faint, unnatural glow, and flee. He was utterly, profoundly alone. His only companions were memory and regret. They played ceaselessly against the backdrop of rustling leaves and bird calls. The sight of the moon through the trees brought back the face of Princess Adizwa, not as he last saw her, but as he'd seen her in life, smiling, distributing alms, her eyes kind. He remembered the weight of his bow, the flight of the arrow, the shattering sound. He grazed on the very mosses near Itujoran, the site of his crime now a place of even deeper, sorrowful power, and felt his new stomach churn with a guilt no herb could soothe. He began to notice changes in the forest itself. It grew, resentful. The drought, which had driven him to his crime, worsened. Streams Adarimi had known since childhood dried up completely. The fruits on the trees were smaller, more bitter. The animals were more skittish, more aggressive. A pall of spiritual unease lay over everything. The vibrant green seemed tinged with grey. He understood, with his human mind, that the broken covenant was having its effect. The forest was withdrawing its bounty, its protection. And then, he saw her. It was during the first harmattan, when a dry, ghostly wind whispered through the skeletal trees. He was drinking at a dwindling stream when he saw a reflection in the water that was not his own antelope form. It was the faint, translucent image of Princess Adizwa, looking at him not with anger, but with a deep, melancholic pity. He startled, bleated, and the image vanished. He thought it a trick of his tormented mind. But she returned. Not often, and never predictably. Sometimes as a wisp of mist that took her shape near the glade. Sometimes as a voice on the wind, a whisper in the rustling leaves. Adarimi, it held no malice. Instead, it carried a profound sorrow, and something else, a sense of being stuck. Her spirit, he realized, was as trapped as his own. The violent, unnatural death in her transformed state had anchored her between worlds. She could not join the ancestors, nor could she rejoin the living. Her appearances became moments of excruciating connection. In them, he felt the echo of her thoughts, not in words, but in emotions and images. He felt her love for the forest, her joy in running as the shimmering doe, her sense of duty as the human princess. He felt the shock of the arrow, not as pain, but as a profound rupture. And he felt her lingering concern for Igbilu, for her father whose grief was turning to stone, for the people who were forgetting the old ways. One night, as a full moon bathed a clearing in silver, her form appeared more solid than before. She did not speak aloud, but the message filled his mind, clear as spring water. Your punishment is to see, Adarimi. To see what you broke. But punishment alone does not mend. The forest is sick. My father's heart is a closed door. The balance is not restoring, it is tipping further. You must become what you were not before. A guardian. Not a hunter of life, but a protector of it. This is the only path that leads away from endless despair. The vision faded, but the purpose she imparted took root in his trapped human soul. A guardian. How could a lone, cursed antelope be a guardian? The opportunity presented itself soon after. He came upon a lost child from a neighboring village, a little boy who had strayed while collecting firewood. The boy was weeping, terrified, on the path of a prowling forest hyena. Adarimi's antelope instinct screamed to run. But his human heart, stirred by Adizwa's charge, overrode them. He did not know how to fight. But he could distract. He stepped into the clearing, letting the moonlight catch his unusual silver scar. The hyena, confused by the bold appearance of potential prey, turned its attention from the boy. Adarimi led it on a frantic chase, using his knowledge of the terrain to weave through thickets too dense for the heavier hyena, finally losing it near a treacherous sinkhole. Exhausted and trembling, he returned to find the boy still huddled, but now watching him with wide, amazed eyes. Slowly, Adarimi nudged the child with his head back onto the main path toward the village border. The boy, sensing no threat, followed the strange, guiding antelope until he saw the familiar fields, then ran home with the story of a spirit there that saved him. Word of the miracle spread. Then it happened again. He found a wounded bushbuck caught in a cruel, illegal snare set by poachers from outside Igbilu. Using his teeth and hoofs, with agonizing difficulty, he worked the wire loose. He guided a pregnant woman from a traveling party away from a nest of venomous snakes she hadn't seen. He would appear at the edge of clearings where hunters from Igbilu were taking too many young animals, his sudden, silent presence, and his glowing scar, startling them into superstitious fear and making them abandon the hunt. He became a legend among the animals and a whispered story among the people, the ear leader ìwòsàn, the antelope hermit, the silent guardian of the forest. He intervened not with strength, but with intelligence, with his cursed human mind applied to his animal form. He learned to use his body as a tool, a hoof to dig, a nudge to guide, a strategic snap of a branch to warn. His silver scar, the mark of his crime, became a beacon of mysterious protection. Yet, with each act, his remorse only deepened. Every life he saved was a stark contrast to the one he had taken. Every thankful gaze from a creature or a lost human was a reminder of the gratitude he had stolen from a kingdom. He lived in a perpetual state of atonement, a penance without end, and the spirit of Adizwa watched over him, her presence a bittersweet balm and a constant reminder of the unhealed wound at the center of it all.